The silence screams louder than any shout. It settles into the corners of the room, thick and cold, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I can see the words hanging in the air between us, glistening like shards of ice before they melt and seep into the floorboards, into the walls, into me. "You have nothing," he says, his voice flat, devoid of warmth, devoid of anything I ever recognized. He points a finger, not at me, but vaguely around the apartment. Our apartment. The one I found, the one I decorated, the one where we built a life I apparently built alone. Nothing without me. The echoes bounce off the exposed brick, a brutal confirmation. Nothing. The space he occupies, suddenly vast and empty, fills with the chill radiating from his gaze. It's not anger anymore. It's something colder, something calculated, like he's looking at a failed investment, a faulty machine. He isn't leaving a person. He's decommissioning an asset. My breath hitches. It's a tiny, pathetic sound in the cavernous space his declaration has created. My throat is tight, squeezing out any possible reply. There are a million things I could say. A million arguments, rebuttals, screams. But the words are frozen solid in my lungs. He's already turned, gathering the last of his things. A stranger packing a suitcase he suddenly realizes belongs to someone else entirely. He doesn't look back. The door clicks shut, and the silence becomes absolute, a void where my life used to be. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the silence and the cold, there was a life. A life that felt for a long time full. Full of late nights hunched over laptops, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with a hopeful scent of possibility. Full of shared dinners where we'd talk about our days, his predictable world of corporate finance, my unpredictable, exhilarating world of building something from nothing. My startup. It was just a name then, a shaky foundation built on passion and a desperately held belief that I could make this work. He was supportive at first. Or maybe just dismissive in a way that looked like support. "That's nice, dear," he'd say, patting my hand when I excitedly told him about a small win, an encouraging email, a user sign-up. His eyes would already be drifting back to his spreadsheets, his golf clubs, his world that felt so much more substantial, more real, than my precarious little venture. He saw it as a hobby, I think. A cute little phase I was going through before I settled back into being the corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, coordinating renovations, managing our life. He managed the money, of course. Always managed the money. He handled the bills, the investments, the budgets. It was easier that way, he'd said. I was too busy with my project. I didn't mind. Not then. I trusted him. He was my husband. We were a team. His success was our success. And mine, when it came, would be too. That was the deal, wasn't it? The unspoken contract of marriage. Partnership. Mutual respect. The startup grew, slowly, painfully. There were days I wanted to quit, to fold it all up and crawl into bed and sleep for a week. Funding was tight. Rejection was a constant companion. Every no felt like a punch to the gut. But then there would be a tiny breakthrough, a user testimonial that made me cry, a small grant that felt like a lifeline thrown from a distant ship. These moments fueled me. They were proof that it wasn't just a hobby. It was real. It mattered. As it grew, so did the distance between us. My late nights became later. His early mornings became earlier. The shared dinners became less frequent, replaced by me eating cold leftovers over a glowing screen, and him eating somewhere else, with colleagues, clients. The conversations shifted too. When I tried to share the complexities, the nuances, the sheer terror and exhilaration of building a business, his eyes would glaze over. "Sounds complicated," he'd say. Or, "Are you sure you're not overdoing it?" The support had curdled into something else. Paternalism, perhaps. Or resentment. He started making comments. Small, sharp remarks dropped casually into conversation like tiny pebbles tossed into calm water, creating ripples of unease. "Still playing with your website?" he'd ask, even though it was a functioning platform with paying customers. Must be nice to have so much free time, he'd say after I'd pulled an all-nighter. He'd laugh, but the laugh never reached his eyes. It was the kind of laugh that cut. I brushed it off. Stress, I told myself. His job was demanding. He was just tired. We were just drifting apart slightly, a temporary phase. We'd find our way back. We had to. This was forever, wasn't it? The first rail crack appeared not with a bang, but a slow, chilling creep. It was subtle at first. Financial decisions he used to discuss with me became decisions he informed me of. A new car, a significant investment in a fund I'd never heard of. When I'd ask questions, gentle questions, trying to understand our finances, he'd become impatient. "I handle this," he'd say, his voice tight. "You focus on your work." The implication was clear. My work wasn't real work, and therefore, I wasn't capable of understanding real money. He started tightening the reins, subtly. Money for the household, always managed by him, seemed to shrink. I started paying for more things personally, dipping into the meager savings I was trying to build from my startup's early revenue. He wouldn't object, wouldn't even comment, just let me do it, creating a silent dependency I didn't fully recognize until later. He was conditioning me, slowly, to rely on his control of the finances, reinforcing the idea that he provided, and my efforts were supplemental. Nice to have, but not essential. Not real. The comments escalated. They shed their casual skin and became openly critical, undermining. "You know, if this startup thing doesn't work out," he said one night over dinner, "you'll need to find a real job. We can't live on dreams forever," he said. But he meant me. His job was secure. His future, in his mind, was guaranteed. Mine, tied to the volatile world of startups, was a constant question mark. A liability. He began questioning my dedication, my hours. Not because he missed me, I realized later, but because my focus on the startup meant less focus on him, on the life he wanted. He wanted the supportive wife, the one who was available, who prioritized his needs, his schedule, his social life. My ambition, my drive, my growing independence, they were inconvenient. They were a threat. The tension in the apartment became a living thing. It hummed in the air, a low, constant vibration that frayed my nerves. Every conversation felt like walking on glass. Every disagreement, no matter how small, would spiral, invariably circling back to the startup, my dedication to it, its uncertain future, and my perceived failure to prioritize us. Meaning him. He stopped asking about it altogether. The startup became the elephant in the room, a silent accusation. My triumphs went uncelebrated, my setbacks unnoticed or met with a passive-aggressive, "I told you so" look. He was waiting, I sensed, waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to give up, waiting for me to prove him right. Then came the investor meeting, the big one. A venture capital firm known for funding successful tech companies. Landing this meeting felt like winning the lottery. I poured everything into the pitch deck, the financials, the projections. Sleepless nights blurred into days. The pressure was immense. This wasn't just about funding anymore, it was about validation. Proof that my years of work, my sacrifices, my belief, they weren't for nothing. I told him about the meeting, bubbling with nervous energy. He was watching TV. He grunted. "Good luck," he said, not turning his head, not asking for details, not offering to help me practice my pitch. Nothing. The lack of interest was a physical blow, sharper than any argument. The meeting went okay. Not great, not terrible. They were interested, but cautious. They wanted more data, more traction, more proof that I could scale. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a maybe, conditional on me hitting specific growth targets over the next 6 months. 6 months of intense, make-or-break work, with no guarantee of success. I came home, exhausted and emotionally drained, wanting comfort, wanting connection, wanting him to just listen. He was waiting, not with comfort, but with a cold, hard expression I hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. The air thickened. I knew instantly this wasn't about the investor meeting. This was about us. He laid it out methodically, like presenting a business case for liquidation. He talked about the distance between us, the different paths we were on, the lack of shared future. He used words like irreconcilable differences, growing apart, different priorities. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just dismantled our marriage, piece by careful piece, right in front of me. And then came the line, the one that would echo in my head for months, the one that felt like the final, crushing stone placed upon my chest. "Your startup," he said, his lip curling slightly, "it's never going to be enough. You're chasing a dream that won't pay the bills. And without my support, without my income, without me." He paused, letting the words hang there, heavy with implication. "You have nothing. Absolutely nothing." He wasn't just stating a financial reality, or what he perceived as one. He was stripping me bare. He was telling me that my identity, my work, my passion, the thing I had poured my soul into, was worthless. And that my worth was tied directly to my connection to him, to his resources, his status, his safety net. Without him, I was null and void. A zero. He watched my face as the words landed, looking for the confirmation of my defeat. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Nothing? Was that true? Had I built my entire identity on such shaky ground? Had I been so consumed by the building that I hadn't noticed the foundation crumbling underneath? He seemed to expect tears, begging a breakdown. He got silence, a stunned, gaping silence as my brain tried to process the sheer brutality of his assessment. My life, reduced to nothing. My efforts, invalidated. My future, declared bankrupt by the man who had promised to stand by me. That was the night. The night the door closed. The night the silence screamed. The night I was told I was nothing. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. Sleeping was impossible. Eating felt like swallowing glass. The apartment, once our home, became a hollow shell, each empty space amplifying the emptiness inside me. His presence was gone, but his words lingered, insidious, whispering in the corners under the bed, in the cold morning air. Nothing without me. Divorce papers arrived. Formal, cold, outlining terms that felt like another calculated insult. He was seeking a significant portion of my assets, including a share of the startup, or rather, a share of its potential future value, assuming it ever had any. He was using his team of expensive lawyers, leveraging his corporate connections, painting a picture of me as an unstable entrepreneur who had neglected our marriage for a pipe dream. His strategy was clear: bankrupt me financially and emotionally, force me into submission, into agreeing to his terms, into proving his point that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. He was banking on my nothingness. My early attempts to navigate this new reality were clumsy, panicked. I hired a lawyer, a kind but weary woman who patiently explained the painful, protracted process ahead. The legal fees alone were terrifying. How could I afford this? How could I fight him when he had seemingly endless resources and I had a startup that was still in that precarious, maybe stage? The pressure from the divorce proceedings seeped into every corner of my life. It affected my focus at work. It chipped away at my confidence. During investor calls or team meetings, I'd have to fight back the sudden surge of panic, the feeling of being utterly exposed and vulnerable. His voice was an unwanted guest in my head, whispering doubts. "He's right. You can't do this. You're nothing." My team noticed. The energy, the spark that had defined me, flickered. They were worried. Some asked gently if everything was okay. I'd offer vague reassurances, pasting on a brave smile that felt like it would shatter if anyone looked too closely. The pressure to keep the business afloat, to hit those growth targets for the VC firm, was immense. Now, added to that was the pressure to survive this personal onslaught, to protect myself, to prove him wrong. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for narrative. For him to be right. For me to be the one who failed, who was lost without him. Every legal maneuver, every condescending email from his lawyer, felt designed to reinforce his initial pronouncement. "You have nothing without me." He seemed to relish it. His lawyer would send aggressive demands, pushing for unrealistic deadlines, forcing me to spend more on legal fees. I imagined him sitting in his office, confident, smug, waiting for the inevitable call from my lawyer saying I was ready to settle, ready to give in. He saw me as a cornered animal, trapped, with no way out. He assumed my perceived lack of personal wealth, tied up in the uncertain value of the startup, left me utterly dependent and weak. The maybe from the VC firm felt further and further away. Hitting those growth targets seemed impossible under this crushing weight. Sales cycles stalled. Key hires were delayed. It felt like the universe was conspiring with him, confirming that I was indeed nothing and destined to fail alone. One particularly brutal week, everything seemed to crash down at once. A major potential client walked away. A key team member, citing the uncertainty, gave notice. And my lawyer called with his latest offer, a settlement so laughably low, so utterly insulting, that it felt less like a negotiation and more like a demand for surrender. It was clear he valued the startup at zero, maybe less. He wanted the apartment, the few joint assets we had, and for me to waive any future claim, essentially signing away any potential future value of the business for pocket change. His message was loud and clear. I was destitute, desperate, and he held all the cards. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, the lawyer's words buzzing in my ear. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air was thick and suffocating. Tears streamed down my face, hot and hopeless. It felt like the end. He had won. His prophecy of my nothingness was coming true. I pictured him then. His confident stride, his self-satisfied smirk. The way he'd looked at me that night. The way he'd dismissed years of my life's work with a wave of his hand. He was so sure. So absolutely certain of my collapse. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped into place. A cold, hard knot of pure, unadulterated resolve. He thought I was nothing. He thought I was weak. He thought he could break me, strip me bare, and leave me for dead. His biggest mistake wasn't leaving me. His biggest mistake was believing his own lie. Believing I was nothing without him. He had fundamentally misunderstood me, my drive, my resilience. He had mistaken my trust for dependence, my love for weakness. He had valued me based on his perception of my external resources, completely missing the internal furnace that had fueled me all along. He was playing a game of financial and emotional attrition, assuming I had no ammunition. But I did. I had the startup. The very thing he dismissed, the thing he valued at zero, the thing he saw as my folly. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was my shield, my weapon, my proof. I wiped the tears from my face, a strange calm settling over me. The fear was still there, a dull ache in my stomach, but it was overlaid by something new, something sharp and steely. Determination. Not just to survive this, but to win. Not just to prove him wrong, but to shatter his carefully constructed reality. I called my lawyer back. My voice was steady, clear. Tell them no, I said. Tell them the offer is rejected. We're not settling. We fight. Then I called my team. I gathered them on a video call, my face probably still a little blotchy but my eyes fixed on theirs. I told them, not everything but enough. Enough about the pressure, the stakes. I admitted the difficulty, the uncertainty. And then I told them why we had to succeed. This wasn't just about building a great company anymore. It was about validating years of work, about proving that passion and dedication had value, about showing the world and one person in particular that nothing could become something extraordinary. I saw the change in their faces. The worry lines softened, replaced by expressions of fierce loyalty and renewed purpose. We were in this together. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. We doubled down. We worked harder, smarter, more strategically than ever before. We analyzed every user interaction, every sales call, every line of code. We cut costs ruthlessly. We iterated on the product based on feedback, building features our users desperately wanted. We hustled for every single customer, every single dollar. The pressure was immense, relentless, but it forged us. It turned fear into fuel. Meanwhile, the divorce proceeded, a parallel narrative of escalating tension. His legal team became more aggressive, smelling blood, convinced my defiance was a last, desperate act before crumbling. They pushed for depositions, demanded endless documents, tried to tie up my resources and time. He seemed genuinely surprised I hadn't capitulated. His confidence wavered slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face during a brief, tense encounter at the courthouse. He hadn't anticipated resilience. He had calculated my breaking point based on financial models and perceived emotional fragility, completely missing the X factor of pure, unadulterated defiance born from betrayal. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that while he was busy trying to dismantle my life in the courtroom, something else was happening behind the scenes. The growth targets we were hitting, the metrics we were crushing out of sheer necessity and determination, were getting noticed. Remember the VC firm? The maybe had shifted. They were seeing our numbers. They were seeing the grit. They were seeing a company and a founder who thrived under pressure. And they weren't the only ones. Another company reached out, a larger competitor, looking to acquire technology and talent to accelerate their own growth. They had been watching us. They liked what they saw. Initial conversations were cautious, exploratory. I kept them confidential. Not just from my ex, obviously, but from almost everyone. It was a fragile possibility, a secret hope I nurtured in the quiet hours before dawn, fueled by adrenaline and fear. The valuation discussions began. They were preliminary, subject to due diligence, market conditions, 1,000 variables. But the numbers they were talking about, they were more than I had ever dreamed of. More than the VC investment would have been. Significantly more. I continued to play the role of the embattled divorcee, struggling to keep her little business afloat. I didn't complain, didn't show weakness, but I didn't broadcast any successes either. His legal team kept pushing, their demands increasingly audacious, their assumption of my poverty solidifying with every rejected lowball offer. They were so focused on leveraging my perceived lack of assets in the divorce that they completely ignored the potential value of the very asset they were trying to dismiss. The acquisition talks accelerated. They saw the value, the potential, the market fit. They wanted to move fast. The terms were favorable. The valuation firmed up. Due diligence was intense, invasive, but I was prepared. Every late night, every sacrifice, every obstacle we had overcome in building the company had created a robust, defensible business. There was a critical point in the acquisition process, a negotiation around the final terms, the closing date. It coincided precisely with a deadline set by his lawyers for me to respond to their latest, most aggressive settlement offer. It felt like fate, a cosmic joke with the highest possible stakes. His offer was designed to back me into a corner, force me to concede everything by threatening financial ruin. My response would be different. The day came. The day I was scheduled to formally respond to his settlement demand. His lawyer had made it clear this was the final offer. Take it or face protracted, expensive litigation that would surely bankrupt me. They were confident. They were certain of their leverage. My lawyer was nervous. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, looking at my calm face. "This is a very aggressive stance. They think you're bluffing." I wasn't bluffing. I was holding a royal flush, and he didn't even know we were playing poker. I drafted my response. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. A simple, factual declaration of my financial position, effective immediately. It referenced the acquisition, the valuation, the imminent closing. It stated, clearly and unequivocally, that based on my new financial reality, his settlement offer was not just rejected, but irrelevant. I included the relevant documentation, a signed letter of intent, the key terms memo, confirmed dates for closing. It wasn't gloating. It was cold, clinical fact. Here is my financial position. Now, let's discuss the division of our assets, and perhaps the future value of the startup you were so eager to claim a piece of. My lawyer sent the response. I imagined the moment it landed on his lawyer's desk. The initial dismissal, assuming it was just more stalling. The casual glance at the documents. The dawning comprehension. The disbelief. The frantic call to my ex. I didn't witness his reaction directly, but I heard about it later, secondhand, filtered through lawyers and court staff. He was reportedly blindsided. Utterly, spectacularly blindsided. He had been so certain of my nothingness, so focused on leveraging my perceived vulnerability, that he had completely missed the ground shifting beneath his feet. He had dismissed the startup as a hobby, a failure waiting to happen, valuing it at zero in his calculations. While he was busy trying to dismantle my life based on that faulty assumption, that dismissed hobby had become a multi-million-dollar reality. The $12 million valuation wasn't just money. It was vindication. It was a giant, flashing sign screaming the opposite of his cruel words. It was everything. Everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, everything he had dismissed. His legal strategy collapsed. His leverage evaporated. The man who had confidently declared I had nothing without him suddenly found himself in a position where the nothing I had built was worth infinitely more than anything he had contributed to our joint future, and potentially more than his own assets after the divorce settlement played out. He hadn't just miscalculated. He had fundamentally misunderstood the source of my power. It wasn't external, it was internal. And I had channeled it into building something tangible, something valuable, something he couldn't take away. The divorce still happened. It wasn't magically erased by the acquisition. But the dynamics were fundamentally, irreversibly altered. I wasn't fighting from a position of weakness, scrambling for scraps. I was negotiating from a position of strength, armed with undeniable proof of my worth, my capability, my somethingness. The process was still difficult, still emotionally draining. But the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely confidence. His attempts to continue his aggressive tactics felt pathetic now, like the flailing of a drowning man who didn't understand the water had suddenly drained away. He had bet everything on my failure, on my dependence, on my nothingness. And he lost. He lost spectacularly. Signing the acquisition papers was a surreal experience. The room was hushed, the lawyer solemn. The pen felt heavy in my hand. $12 million. A number that represented years of struggle, doubt, and unwavering belief. A number that felt like a direct rebuttal to 4 cruel words. The money landed in my account. A staggering sum. It was more than financial security. It was freedom. Freedom from fear, from doubt, from the insidious whisper of nothing. Freedom to build whatever I wanted next on my own terms. The emotional aftermath was complex. There wasn't a moment of triumphant gloating, not really. There was a profound sense of relief, yes, and a quiet satisfaction. But there was also a lingering sadness for the marriage that had died, for the person I thought I knew, for the years spent building a life with someone who ultimately saw me as a liability. Success, when it comes after such a battle, feels different. It's not just joy, it's mixed with the scar tissue of betrayal and struggle. The money is nice, life-changing, certainly. But the true win wasn't the millions. The true win was reclaiming my narrative, proving my worth to myself, standing tall on the foundation I had built with my own 2 hands, brick by painful brick. He told me I had nothing without him. He choked on those words when my nothing sold for $12 million. And as I stand here now, looking out at the horizon, the future stretching out before me, bright and uncertain and entirely mine, I know he was wrong. I had something all along. Something he couldn't see, couldn't value, couldn't take away. I had myself. And that, it turns out, was everything. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.